Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 235 of Optimal Living Advice, the podcast where we take any questions you might have about the many struggles of life and get them answered for you here on the show. I am your host, Certified Life Coach Greg Audino, reminding you before we begin that if you have a question you would like help with on the show, we welcome you to email it to us at advice@oldpodcast.com. Now, our asker today has done just that. She sent in a question about how she can be a better listener for her boyfriend. Very good of her to be asking for help with this. She clearly is trying her best. But it seems that's only pulling her further away from being the type of listener they'd both like her to be. Interesting. Why might that be? Well, let's see if we can figure it out and help her. We'll do that now. But today we also have another Vibely update coming at the end of the show. So be sure to stick around and hear some words of wisdom from one of your fellow listeners, as well as a brief description of what Vibely is for those who don't know. But now, here is the question for today. My boyfriend and I get along really well. We have very few problems and have been going for 3 years strong through a lot of tough times for us both. But there's one thing that comes up a lot and gets in the way of us, and that's him telling me that I'm not a good listener. This had led to a few arguments because I try to be better at it, and he always tells me I'm still too focused on myself than I am with him. But he tells me he sees me do this with my family as well. I need to know once and for all what makes a good listener. Please. Okay, good question, asker. Definitely a question that more people should be asking than actually are. So good on you for being devoted enough to get better at this, and good on your boyfriend for speaking up too. Thank you for sending this in. So this is the problem that's very easy to run into when it comes to listening. I don't want you to stress about this too much. I definitely don't want you to shame yourself because it's a very natural instinct to focus on yourself, whether or not you're trying to listen to someone else. As a matter of fact, that's something that we can subconsciously take a lot of pride in doing when we are listening, because it's easy to think that active listening means looking inward to put ourselves in the shoes of the person we're listening to so that we can help relate or find solutions based on our own experiences. But this is the distinction that many of us fail to make. The distinction between listening and problem solving, the line between which is quite blurry sometimes. So if your intention is to help, but that help seems to go unappreciated because that's not what the other person is actually looking for, it can obviously get frustrating, and conflict can easily arise because you feel shamed for having tried your best to do what you thought was right or what you thought they were actually asking for beneath the words they spoke. Ironically, this is a trap men tend to fall into, and women are on the other side of it, so your roles are a bit reversed here, but it's okay. It happens all the time. Maybe you're just a natural problem solver, and this would be another example of how something normally seen as beneficial can still have its downfalls. But alas, listening is not about solving a problem necessarily. A lot of the time, people just want space to vent and to be heard, or they simply want to share an idea, right? Depends on the type of conversation. But hey, maybe this isn't you either. Maybe I'm assuming too much. Maybe I'm assuming this all wrong. And maybe you know better than to try solving a problem when it isn't asked for. Yet your boyfriend still tells you that you're making it about you. Should that be the case, what he may be referencing is your tendency, many people's tendency, to assuage his fears by way of talking about how things could be worse, with or without personal examples from your own life. Now, this one can be odd because one might think that reminding someone of how much worse it could be would help to generate gratitude. I do this for myself a lot, actually, and I personally find it helpful. But when we're seeking help from someone else, it's not often what we want to hear. In that type of scenario, people are more likely to feel as though their feelings are being minimized and that they aren't being heard that way. I actually put up a survey about this amongst my readers one time, and I found that by a landslide, people saw this as minimizing rather than supporting. But while helping to shift focus towards gratitude can be a useful tool, it should not be done by means of comparison. And that's essentially what's happening more often than not in a situation like this. And when you do that, you're basically creating a competition between people or between experiences. And that's not something that good listeners do. And this is true of not only emotional conversations, it even exists in casual conversations between friends. Every single one of us has been here. When one friend announces a piece of news, and while the other responds, they can't help but to mention the fact that they've already heard that news, even if the response is entirely amicable. Or they might quietly one-up it with a bigger piece of news. So this is extremely minimal, of course, something we often don't realize we're doing. But it shows how traces of competitiveness or trying to win can exist in teeny tiny doses. And that urge can compound should the circumstances of the conversation be more dire, as you can imagine. So you have to remember, you will have time to share your own concerns. You will have time to share your own cool pieces of news, your own means of finding ways to be grateful, your own ways of combating anxiety. But when you're listening, you should be listening and putting your focus on the true needs of the person across from you. Keeping this in mind, you can see how the harder you try, the more you can distance yourself from good listening. So my advice, ease up, because I sensed a little bit of franticness in your question, and that leads me to believe that your devotion to becoming a better listener, which is very noble, has ultimately turned into you spinning your wheels a bit. But here's the good news. Your boyfriend will care mostly about you making the effort more than anything. So, in addition to what you've heard from me today, don't be afraid to ask him. Ask him to cite ways in which you've seemed too focused on yourself and why, and just hear him. And when he's in the middle of saying something, you can ask him if he'd like potential solutions or if he would like you to just listen and say nothing. Yeah, that might sound funny or disruptive to a vulnerable moment, but given that this is a stressor between you two, it isn't. Rather, it's a symbol of you putting him first and temporarily suspending your own urges to take control of the conversation so as to make you more comfortable. That is what he wants, and that is what good listening is. Big thanks to the asker for sending this one in. Such a great question, and as you can see, something that we can all probably apply to many of our relationships. I know I can. And now for a little Vibely, shall we, everybody? For those who have not heard about it yet, Vibely is our online group which provides listeners like yourself a chance to optimize the lives of each other, so to speak, by sharing pieces of your own advice and personal experiences in response to prompts that we provide on the platform. I highly recommend you join via the link in this episode's description if you haven't already, because it is such a great place to get to know one another as well as us hosts. And for those of you who like group chats with your friends like I do, we even have group chats in there about self-development, about health, finance, and even a miscellaneous one for whatever you'd like to talk about. But for today's feature, we will look at one of our most recent prompts, and it asks you guys to tell us what you think some of the world's most pressing issues are, and maybe how you think they could be helped. A lot of really informative ideas have been thrown into the mix, and today I will share one from listener Alex Calfin. Alex says, quote, I think one of our species' biggest challenges is that we are inclined to be selfish and self-absorbed. Everything we do is usually to better the world for humans and for our personal advancements. I think the more we can be intentional and look outside ourselves, humans are just one of many species, the more likely it is that we will make thoughtful choices that can benefit all. End quote. Greg here again, right on board with Alex here. You know, even if you listen to enough OLA, you can see how it exists in so many ways. You know, arguably, the focus on oneself that she mentions could be applied to what we discussed today in today's episode about listening. But it also exists in big, unrelated concepts like AI, which we covered recently, like 2 or 3 episodes ago. So definitely something worth considering, as it's likely more prevalent in all of our lives than we think. So big thanks to Alex. I'll wrap up now, though, team. I appreciate you being here as always. If you have any questions about this episode or one of your own that you'd like my help with, you know where to find me. Otherwise, I will catch you back here in a couple of days for the Friday show. Until then, everyone.